Welcome to Fear and Fiction, where the stories are strange and the fear is real. I have never once in my life been a patient person, and I want to say that up front because it's basically the whole reason any of this happened to me at all. I grew up in Bronzeville, which, if you don't know Chicago, is the South Side neighborhood that used to be called the Black Metropolis back in the day. State Street through there used to be called the Stroll, and I mean that literally. That was its name, and it was lined with jazz clubs and theaters. The kind of place where you catch somebody like Louis Armstrong on a random Tuesday. My grandmother used to talk about it like it was a whole different planet from the block I grew up on, because the block I grew up on was Stateway Gardens. 8 high-rises, built in the 50s, right up against the Dan Ryan. My mother always said it was supposed to be a fresh start for people, brand new apartments instead of the slums they'd been living in. And for a minute, from what she told me, it actually was that. By the time I came along, it wasn't that anymore. The city stopped keeping the buildings up, plain and simple. And once that starts, everything falls apart at the same time. The elevators were the worst of it. They go down for weeks. And once maintenance basically gave up on fixing anything quick, the elevators became their own whole problem, not just an inconvenience. Women in my building did not ride alone after a certain hour. That wasn't superstition. That was just something everybody's mother told them, because there were men who'd figured out an elevator with a broken door sensor was the easiest trap in the whole building. My mother drilled that rule into me so many times, I could recite it in my sleep. Wait for it to be shared. Don't get on by yourself, no matter how late you are, no matter how tired you are, no matter what. And I want to be honest, I broke that rule constantly, because like I said, I am not a patient person. And standing around in a lobby, waiting on an elevator that might not even come used to make me want to scream. This one particular night I was coming back from my cousin's, later than I meant to be, and the elevator actually came fast for once. Doors right there open and waiting like it was doing me a favor. Empty car, nobody else around in the lobby to ride up with me. I got on anyway. Told myself it was fine. Told myself I survived worse. Told myself I was 2 minutes from my own front door and being scared of an empty elevator was ridiculous. It stopped between the 6th and 7th floor. Just stopped. No warning. Lights flickering that particular way they did when the whole system was having one of its moods. I stood there annoyed more than scared at first, if I'm honest, because my main thought was that I was going to be stuck in this thing for who knows how long, and I had work in the morning. Then I heard somebody breathing. Not through the doors, inside. In that car with me, close enough that I could hear it clearly, and there was nobody else standing in that elevator but me. I want to explain what that sound actually was, because breathing is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I need to be specific. It wasn't panic breathing, like somebody else was scared too. It was slow, even, almost patient, if a sound can be patient, like whoever it belonged to had absolutely nowhere else to be and no reason to hurry. I hit the door button so many times the plastic actually cracked under my thumb. Hit the alarm. Hit every button on that panel at once like that was going to do something. The breathing didn't get louder, and it didn't get quieter. It just kept going, steady, right there, close enough that if I'd reached out in the dark, I would have touched whatever it belonged to, except I did not reach out. I have never once been tempted to reach out, and I want that on the record too. The car dropped, all at once. No warning, and the doors opened on the lobby floor like nothing had ever happened. Empty car, empty lobby. Just me standing there breathing hard myself now. Finally, like my body had saved it up the whole time I was stuck. I called my mother from the stairwell before I even went up to my own apartment. She didn't ask me a single question about what I heard. She just asked if I'd been alone in the car. I told her yes. And she went quiet in a way that told me everything before she said another word. She said that elevator had been doing that since before I was born. Said the building had lost people to worse things than a stuck elevator over the years. Real things, documented things, the kind the newspapers actually wrote about. and that some of what got left behind in that building never really got demolished along with the concrete. She said the rule wasn't really about the men who used to wait for an empty car. That was the reason she gave me as a kid, because it was true and it was simple and a child could understand it. The real reason, she said, went back further than that, and she wasn't in a hurry to explain the rest of it to a grown woman standing in a stairwell at midnight either. Stateway is gone now, torn down years ago, replaced with townhomes going for more money than anybody from my building could ever afford, on the exact same dirt. I still won't get on an elevator by myself. Any elevator anywhere, not just there. My husband thinks it's a quirk. I've never once explained the whole reason to him, because some things you just carry by yourself, and because some habits, once your mother puts them in you properly, they don't ever really leave. People who know me will tell you, I talk about my old neighborhood like I never left it, and honestly, that's fair, because for a long stretch of my adult life, I basically didn't let myself think about how much it had actually changed. I grew up in Rockwell Gardens, over in East Garfield Park on Chicago's west side. Not a lot of people outside Chicago know that name, but if you know the city, you know it was right up there with the worst of them. What's funny, and I mean actually funny, not funny strange, is that the whole complex got its name from flower gardens. Real ones. Award-winning ones, if you believe the old-timers, that the very first residents kept up in the 50s before I was even born. My grandmother had this way of describing those gardens like they were something out of Eden, like the flowers alone could tell you everything about what the place was supposed to become. Growing up there in the 70s and 80s, there was no Eden left anywhere close. 1968 tore up that whole side of the city after Dr. King was killed, and Rockwell never really came back from it the way some other places managed to. Then the gangs moved in hard through the 70s and 80s, fighting over the heroin trade up and down our block. And by my teenage years, the city had to run something called Operation Clean Sweep, just to get transient gang members out of buildings they didn't even live in. The buildings themselves were built with these open-air walkways connecting the units, breezeways, everybody just called them that. Great idea on paper, I guess. More air, more light. In practice, they turned into the most dangerous stretch of real estate in the whole complex. Things got thrown off them onto people below. Fights happened up there that spilled straight down onto whoever was walking underneath. My mother had one rule about those breezeways that she repeated so often it basically became a second heartbeat in our house. Don't linger. Keep walking. Don't stop to talk to anybody up there, not even somebody you know, especially not once it starts getting dark. I moved away for college and stayed away for 20-some years, built a whole life somewhere else, and then a few years back, I moved back to Chicago, close to my old block, because my mother was getting older and I wanted to be near her. The high-rises are long gone now, torn down back in the 2000s, but there's still a stretch of the old grounds nobody's built on yet, just sitting there behind a chain-link fence, weeds coming up through where the buildings used to stand. I used to walk past it on my way to see my mother, and I'll be honest, I liked walking past it. Made me feel like a kid again for a minute every single time. One evening, right around dusk, same time of day my mother used to warn me about without fail, I saw somebody standing where I swear one of the old breezeways used to be. Just standing there, in open air. No building around him at all anymore. Nothing but weeds and a chain-link fence. And he was standing exactly at the height a second-floor breezeway would have put him, like there was still a floor under his feet that hadn't existed in 20 years. Here's the part that still embarrasses me a little, because it's not smart, and I know that now. I stopped walking. I called out to him, because for one full second I was absolutely convinced it was somebody I used to know back in the day. Somebody I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, and old habits about greeting your people apparently outlast old habits about staying safe. He didn't answer right off, just kept standing there at that impossible height, and the longer I looked, the less his outline seemed to hold together properly, like my eyes kept trying to fill in a shape that wasn't actually complete. Then, all at once, way too fast for how still he'd been the whole time, he was closer, not walking closer, just closer, the way a picture changes between blinks. I turned around and I walked, fast, the way my mother always told me to, function over feeling. Don't run because running means you've stopped watching where your feet are going. Just walk with purpose and don't look back to check. I didn't look back until I was at my mother's door, and when I finally did, there was nothing behind me at all. Empty lot, weeds, chain link fence, ordinary evening. I told my mother what happened, standing right there on her porch, and she didn't look surprised the way I expected her to. She said the breezeways took people over the years in ways that never made the papers, quiet ways, the kind of thing a family just absorbed and didn't talk about outside the building. She said the ground remembers a shape a lot longer than the city remembers to knock the actual building down properly. I still walk past that lot on my way to see her. I don't stop anymore, and I don't call out to anybody. I think I recognize standing where a floor used to be, no matter how much they look like somebody I used to love. Every kid on my block had the same rule, and I mean every single one, so much that it barely felt like a rule specific to my house. Be home before the streetlights come on. Not when they're coming on, before. I grew up in Henry Horner homes, on Chicago's near west side. If you've read a certain very famous book about two brothers growing up in a Chicago housing project, that's my old development they were writing about, and reading that book as an adult was a strange experience, because it was recognizable to me in a way most books about places like where I grew up never are. Horner went up in the late 50s, designed by an actual big-name architecture firm, if you can believe that. Big open superblocks, towers with these long gallery hallways running the length of each floor, wire fencing along the galleries so kids couldn't fall or, depending who you ask, so kids couldn't climb out either way you looked at it. My mother used to say, those hallways felt like a cage, dressed up as a porch. And once I got old enough to actually look at them with adult eyes, I understood exactly what she meant. The streetlight rule wasn't just my mother's rule. It was everybody's mother's rule, all up and down Damon, all through the super blocks. And as a kid, you don't really ask why a rule like that exists. You just know that breaking it gets you the worst kind of trouble. Worse than a whipping even. The kind where your mother goes quiet with you for days after instead of yelling. I was 9, maybe 10, and my whole thing back then was proving I wasn't scared of anything, which, if you know any 9-year-old boys, is a pretty normal thing to be working through, except where I lived, it came with real stakes attached to it that I didn't understand yet. There was a courtyard between two of the buildings that everybody said got dark faster than anywhere else on the block, even before the actual streetlights came on for real. Something about the way the towers blocked the sun, I always figured, nothing more than that. My friends and I used to dare each other to be the last one standing in that courtyard once it started going dark. Just a dumb kid game, nothing more serious than that in our heads. One evening, I made up my mind I'd outlast everybody else standing there. Everybody else peeled off, one at a time, the way kids do when a game stops being fun and starts being real, until it was just me standing there alone in that courtyard with the light dying fast around me, proving a point to exactly nobody. That's when I noticed the streetlight on the corner hadn't come on yet, even though it was clearly time for it, clearly dark enough. And the one after that hadn't either. Down the whole row, dark, 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 like something was moving down the line ahead of the dark itself, keeping just barely in front of where the light should have already been. Here's the actual detail that scared me, because it wasn't the dark itself. Plenty of kids are scared of the dark, and that's a normal, boring kind of scared. What scared me was that the streetlights weren't just failing to come on. They were staying off in order, one after another, moving toward me specifically, like something was walking the row ahead of its own self, turning them off, or maybe just making sure they never got the chance to turn on at all. I ran. I'm not going to pretend I did anything brave in that moment, because I didn't. I ran straight for my building's door, and behind me I heard something that I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe accurately and have never once managed to. The closest I can get is that it sounded like a held breath finally being let out, except it went on way too long for anybody's actual lungs. I got inside right as the last street light on our stretch, the one nearest my own door, finally clicked on, bright and completely normal, like it had been that way the whole time, and I'd imagined the rest of it. My mother was standing right inside waiting on me, and she didn't yell, which somehow scared me worse than yelling would have. She just asked me one thing. Had I made it in before the light on our building came on, or after? I told her the truth, which was that I genuinely didn't know anymore. It had all happened so close together I couldn't say for certain which came first. She held on to me a long time that night, longer than felt normal for a 9-year-old getting a talking to, and she finally admitted the streetlight thing had never actually been about keeping me safe from people passing through, even though that's what she'd always told me, plain and simple, because a kid could hold on to that version without any trouble. Whatever the real reason was, it ran back further than her own mother even. And standing there in that hallway, she wasn't ready to hand a 9-year-old the rest of it, and maybe never would be. Horner's long gone at this point, demolished years back, and the streets around there look completely different. New development standing where our building used to be. But I still feel it in my chest sometimes. When the sky starts going that particular color, it goes right before a street light would normally click on. Some old habit that never fully let go of me, even all these years later, even this far from that courtyard. I've never believed in anything I couldn't personally verify, which my grandmother always said was going to get me in trouble one day. And I suppose she turned out to be right, though probably not in the way she expected. I grew up in Robbins, Illinois, a little village south of Chicago that most people have never heard of, which is honestly a shame, because it's got one of the most remarkable histories of any town in this whole state. Founded back in 1917, one of the oldest black incorporated towns in the entire country, built by families who wanted a place where they could actually own land and govern themselves without answering to anybody else's rules. Marcus Garvey used to hold rallies there. One of the first black millionaires in America made his home there. But the piece of Robbins history that always grabbed me hardest, even as a kid, was the airfield. Back in the 30s, a group of black aviation mechanics and pilots, shut out of every other airstrip near Chicago because of segregation, pooled their money and bought land right there in Robbins and built their own airport. First one in the whole country owned and operated by black people, trained pilots there. Some of the original Tuskegee Airmen actually learned to fly on that very ground before they ever got anywhere near the war. It only lasted a couple years before a storm tore the hangar apart, and they never rebuilt it, moved their whole operation to another suburb instead. And what's left of that original airfield now is just an overgrown stretch of land most folks in town don't think twice about, except for the one rule that's outlasted basically everything else about the place. Don't go out there after dark. Everybody says it. Every family in Robbins says some version of it. And every single time I asked why, the answer was some version of, it's just not safe out there, without anybody ever explaining what unsafe actually meant. No specifics, no stories, nothing you could actually hold on to and examine, which for somebody like me was basically an invitation. I've been putting together a little research project on the airfield for a while, mostly for my own satisfaction, pulling old newspaper clippings, talking to whoever in town would still talk to me about it. And there's a particular kind of stubbornness that comes over me when people won't give me a real answer to a direct question. So eventually, I did the thing everybody in my family had been telling me my whole life not to do. I walked out there myself one evening, right as it was getting dark, just to see for myself what unsafe actually looked like in practice. Nothing at first. Overgrown field, cracked stretch of old pavement here and there where a runway apparently used to be. So quiet I could pick out the sound of my own footsteps clear as anything. Then I heard an engine, not a car engine. Older than that, rougher, the particular uneven cough of something from a much earlier era than anything actually driving around that part of Illinois today, coming from somewhere directly above me, though there wasn't a single light in the sky anywhere I could see. Here's the part I'll admit honestly, because it wasn't fear exactly, not at first. It was closer to excitement, if I'm being fully truthful with you, because some part of me thought I'd actually found something real, something I could record, improve, and show people. I got my phone out, started recording the empty sky above me like an idiot. The sound got louder and closer, and then it did something an engine has no business doing. It slowed down, deliberately. The way something slows down when it's decided to come in for a landing, right over that cracked stretch of old runway, right over the exact spot where I happened to be standing at that particular moment. That's when the excitement finally left my body entirely, and something much more sensible took over. I ran, and I did not stop running until I was back on a paved street with actual working streetlights around me. And when I finally looked back, the sound had stopped completely, like it had simply never been there at all. I went home and showed my grandmother the video I'd recorded, half expecting her to explain it away from me, the way she usually explains everything away from me. She didn't. She watched the whole thing in complete silence, and then told me something I hadn't heard before, not in all my research, not from anybody else in town. She said the men who built that airfield never stopped trying to bring it back. Not completely, not even after they rebuilt somewhere else entirely. Said some things you build with your own hands don't ever fully let you leave them behind, even once you move everything that matters someplace safer. I still go back to Robbins every chance I get because my family's still there, and that town means everything to me. But I don't walk out toward that field after dark anymore, and for the first time in my whole life, I've stopped needing to have an explanation for exactly why not. My mother kept the keys to Quinn Chapel for almost 40 years, and there was exactly one door in that whole building she never once let me open on my own, not until I was well into my 40s myself. I need to explain Brooklyn to you first, because it's a place a surprising number of Illinois people couldn't point to on a map, and it deserves better than that. It's a small village right along the Mississippi, just north of East St. Louis. A woman named Priscilla Baltimore, folks called her Mother Baltimore, led 11 families across that river, out of slavery in Missouri and into freedom on the Illinois side, sometime around 1829. No other black community in this entire country has governed itself longer than this one has, going back further than any town of its kind once it got its official charter in 1873. The town motto is founded by chance, sustained by courage, and if you know the actual history, you understand that's not just something pretty somebody wrote on a sign. Quinn Chapel was built not long after the town itself, one of the very first African Methodist Episcopal churches in that whole part of the country, and it served as a stop on the Underground Railroad. There's a door, hidden right under the altar, that leads down to a small space where people fleeing slavery used to hide while they waited for it to be safe to move again. It's still there today. You can go see it if the church lets you. My mother used to take me down there as a little girl, show me the door, tell me a little bit about what it meant, but she was always very particular about one thing. She never let me open it myself. She'd open it, let me look, and then she'd close it right back up herself before we left, every single time, no exceptions. And if I asked to be the one to do it, she'd just say not yet, without any further explanation. It wasn't until she was much older and I'd taken over most of the caretaking duties myself that she finally sat me down and explained the actual rule, not just the history lesson version she'd always given me as a kid. She said that door isn't just old wood over an old hiding space anymore. Said too many people pass through there scared, desperate, praying for that door to just be lumber at this point. Said something of all that fear and all that hope soaked into the space over the years, the way water soaks into stone if you leave it long enough. And it's still down there, patient, waiting on something, though she was never able to tell me exactly what. The rule, she said, is that door only opens for a real reason. Showing respect to somebody who's earned it, teaching a child their own history properly, honoring the people who actually hid down there once. It does not open for curiosity, and it does not open just because a person happens to be standing nearby with a key in their pocket. And whenever it does open, for whatever reason, it has to be closed again before the sun goes all the way down, every single time. No exceptions, not once, not ever, in all the years she kept those keys. I asked her, naturally, what happens if you break that particular rule? She told me she genuinely didn't know, because in close to 40 years of keeping those keys, she had never once let it happen, and she strongly suggested I not be the one to find out for either one of us. About a year after she passed, I had a moment of real weakness, and I'm not proud of it, but I'll tell it honestly because that's the whole reason I'm telling any of this. I was down there alone one evening, going through some old records, and I opened that door myself for no real reason at all. No visitor, no lesson, nothing but my own grief and my own curiosity about whether I'd feel anything different from all those years of just watching my mother do it instead. I got pulled into paperwork, into memories, into missing her, and I lost track of the actual time in a way I never once let myself do while she was alive to check on me. By the time I looked up, the sun was already down outside, fully down, and that door was still standing open beneath the altar. I want to describe what I felt in that moment as carefully as I can, because it wasn't a shape, and it wasn't a sound exactly either. It was closer to a pressure, like the whole room had taken in a breath and was holding it, waiting to see what I'd do next. And underneath that pressure, there was something that felt like an old kind of patience finally running thin. I shut that door so fast I nearly caught my own fingers in it, latched it properly, and said the closest thing to a prayer I think I've ever meant in my whole life. Nothing happened after that. The pressure just eased back out of the room the same way it had come in, slow, like a tide going back out to sea. I still keep those keys today. I've passed the rule on properly now, to my own daughter, the real version this time, not just a history lesson. That door still opens for the right reasons, same as it always has, but it closes again before dark, every single time, no exceptions. I understand my mother completely now, in a way I never quite could until I'd nearly failed at the one thing she asked of me. My mother was not the kind of woman who gave up on anything, and I mean that as both the best and the worst thing I can tell you about her. We lived in Cabrini-Green, on Chicago's near north side, in one of the last high-rises still standing during my own teenage years. If you know Chicago at all, you know that name, and you probably know it for all the wrong reasons. The neglect, the gang violence, the reputation that got attached to it, long before anybody bothered asking the actual families living there what it was really like. What people don't always know is that the neighborhood used to be called Little Hell, long before Cabrini went up, full of Italian and Irish and Swedish families crowded in near the old gas works on the river. It only became a black neighborhood once the towers went up in the 50s and 60s. By the time the city decided to tear the whole thing down, starting in the mid-90s, they did it building by building, floor by floor, moving families out gradually as each tower got condemned. And my mother refused every single relocation offer they sent our way, for years, on principle, because she said she was not going to be pushed out of a home she'd raised 4 children in, just because the city had decided it was more convenient to knock it down than fix it up properly. So we watched our building empty out around us, slow, over a period of a couple years, floor by floor, going quiet, going dark, while we stayed put on the 9th floor, one of the last few families left in a building that used to hold well over 100 units. By the end, there were maybe 2 other families left in the entire building, which, if you've never lived somewhere like that, is a very particular and specific kind of eerie. A building built to hold hundreds of people, made for the sound of hundreds of people, and instead it's just you, and your footsteps in the stairwell echo in a way they were never built to echo, because there's nobody left on the floors around you to absorb any of that sound anymore. The city kept telling my mother the building wasn't safe at that occupancy level, and she kept telling them she'd decide for herself what was and wasn't safe in her own home. It started small. Sounds from units we knew for a fact were empty, because we'd watched the families move out ourselves, watched the padlocks go on the doors, footsteps on floors that should have had nobody on them at all, a television, once, playing faintly through a wall that backed onto an apartment that had been sealed up and empty for months by that point. My mother's answer to all of it, every single time, was the same. She said an empty building doesn't stay empty long, not really. Said whatever's already living rent-free in a place like that moves in faster than any new tenant ever could, and it doesn't need the city's permission or a lease to do it either. And once it's in, it's a lot less interested in leaving than any actual family ever was. The night I remember clearest, I was maybe 15, and I woke up to the sound of a door opening down the hall. Not our door. One of the sealed units, 3 doors down, empty for the better part of a year at that point, padlock and all. I got up and I looked, because I was 15 and foolish in the specific way 15-year-olds are foolish, and the door was standing open. All right, no padlock visible anywhere on it anymore, and the apartment beyond it was lit up warm and yellow, furnished, like an entire family was living there and had been the whole time, going about some perfectly ordinary evening just on the other side of that door. I did not go any closer. That's the one thing I actually did right in this whole story. I went and got my mother instead, and by the time she came out into the hall with me, the door was shut again, padlocked back in place, exactly the way it had been every single day before that night. She didn't act surprised. She just told me, real plain, that it was late and to go back to bed, and we were leaving in the morning. We did leave. Finally, the very next day, moved in with my aunt on the south side while the city finished processing our new housing voucher. My mother never once admitted, not to this day, not once in the years since, that anything about that night was what actually changed her mind. She still says she simply had enough of the noise, the disrepair, the slow decay of a place she'd once been proud to call home. But she packed that whole apartment in a single day, after years of refusing to pack even one single box. I think about that building sometimes, mostly gone now, except for a handful of row houses on the edge of where it used to stand. I think about all those empty units we watched fill up with padlocks over those years. And I think about what my mother said, about how an empty building never actually stays empty. Not really, not for long, no matter how many locks the city puts on the doors. For most of my life, I avoided reading anything serious about where I grew up. And honestly, that was a choice, not an accident, because I already knew enough of the hard parts firsthand and didn't feel any need to go looking for more of them on purpose. I grew up in Robert Taylor homes, 28 high-rises running 2 solid miles down State Street on Chicago's south side in the Bronzeville area. At its peak, it was the largest public housing development in the entire country, maybe the whole world at the time, more than 25,000 people living along that one stretch. I don't need to tell most people what that name means once you say it out loud in Chicago. It carries its own weight before you've said another single word. What I never bothered learning, not until my own 50s had already arrived, was who the place was actually named for. Robert Rockwell Taylor was a real man, a real housing advocate, born down in Alabama, who became the first black board member of the Chicago Housing Authority and eventually its chairman. He'd spent years building actual housing for black families on the south side, real homes, decent ones, financially backed in part by money from Sears. In 1950, he resigned from that board in open protest because the city council point blank refused to approve integrated housing sites all across Chicago. He wanted black families to have real options spread throughout the whole city. The city said no, over and over, and he walked away from his own position, rather than keep quietly going along with segregated housing policy. A few years after he died, the city built the largest, most concentrated, most segregated public housing development in the country's entire history, and they named it after him. I didn't know a single word of that history growing up there, not one word of it. To me, and to basically everybody I knew, Robert Taylor was just a name on a sign, same as any street name, no more meaning attached to it than any other word you walk past every day of your life without a second thought. I finally started digging into it after I ran into an old friend from the building at a funeral, of all places, someone I hadn't seen in probably 20 years. We got to talking about the old days the way you do at funerals, and she mentioned, almost as an aside, that Taylor himself never once lived in the buildings that carried his own name. Said he actually protested how they turned out before he passed, protested the sheer scale of them, the segregation baked directly into the design itself, the exact same battle he'd already lost with the city council years earlier, playing out all over again, except now with his own name stamped right across the top of it. That single detail wouldn't leave me alone. I started digging through everything about him I could actually find. Real archives, real newspaper records, and the deeper I got into it, the more it started to feel less like history and more like something closer to being haunted. if that makes any sense at all to somebody who hasn't lived through it themselves. Because here's the part I couldn't shake once I really understood it properly. His whole name, his entire life's actual work, was fighting specifically against the exact thing that development eventually became. And the city took that name, a name that had meant integration, meant real choice, meant a real fight against exactly this outcome, and pasted it directly onto the very worst version of segregated public housing this country had ever built up to that point. I went back to the old site not long after that funeral, where the towers used to stand before they tore them all down, starting in the late 90s. Nothing there now, but Legend South, the mixed income development that replaced it. Low rise, quiet, nothing at all like what used to be there in my own childhood. I stood right about where I think our old building would have stood, best as I could work it out from old photographs I'd found. And I said his actual full name out loud, just once, mostly to myself, Robert Rochon Taylor, because it suddenly felt wrong that I'd lived under that name my entire childhood without ever once knowing the actual man it belonged to. I'm not going to tell you something reached out and touched me right there on that sidewalk, because that's not what happened, and nothing about this story is that kind of story. What I'll tell you instead is that the wind picked up strangely for 1 second, right after I said his name out loud, strong enough to make me look up sharply toward where the towers used to stand against the sky. And for just that one instant, less than a second really, I could have sworn I saw the exact outline of one of them still standing there against the clouds, the way an old photograph will sometimes bleed faintly through a newer one laid on top of it. It was gone before I could even be sure I'd seen anything at all. I think about that man's whole name a lot now, more than I ever expected to at this point in my life. A man who spent his entire career fighting against exactly what eventually got built in his own honor. I don't know if that's a haunting in the way people usually mean that word, but it's the closest thing to one I've personally ever experienced, and it stayed with me a great deal longer than I expected it to when I first heard it mentioned, almost as an afterthought at a funeral for somebody else entirely. All right, family, made it to the end. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch the video. I will be starting a new series with this. This will be Illinois. I'll do every state. If you got some requests, jump in those comments and let me know. Also, tell me which story was your favorite. Until the next time.